The planet Athenar was known throughout the galaxy for its warriors. Home to the Valen species, a race of towering, powerful beings, Athenar's warriors were legendary. They could defeat opponents many times their size and strength, and they were feared across the stars. The Valan princess, Velaray, was the most feared of them all. Velaray was tall, her muscles sculpted from years of combat training. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, and her eyes glowed with a fierce determination. As the heir to the Valan throne, she had proven herself in battle again and again. No one had ever defeated her, not even the strongest of alien warriors from distant worlds. She had never been challenged in a way that made her doubt her abilities. Until now. The princess stood before an enormous audience in the grand arena of Athenar, surrounded by alien spectators from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was electric. Every eye was on her, waiting for her to speak. She raised her hand, and the crowd quieted instantly. Her voice echoed through the stadium, sharp and commanding. "Today I issue a challenge to the universe." Velaray's words boomed across the arena. "Any warrior, of any species who believes they can defeat me, come forward. You will have 1 minute in the ring with me. If you can last, you will have earned my respect." A murmur ran through the crowd. The idea of someone surviving even a second against Velaray seemed impossible. The princess was known for her strength and skill, and no one, not even the most skilled warriors, had ever come close to lasting against her. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze cold and confident. "You have 1 minute," she repeated. "If you cannot last that long, you will be destroyed." The challenge was simple, but it was also an invitation for someone to attempt the impossible. The crowd buzzed with excitement, eager to see who would step forward. Many species had attempted to challenge the Valan warriors before, but none had succeeded. Velaray was undefeated, and she made no secret of it. She was invincible. At least, that's what everyone thought. Then, to everyone's surprise, a lone figure stepped forward from the back of the crowd. The figure was human, dressed in the simple, worn uniform of an Earth soldier. The crowd fell silent, their eyes narrowing as they watched the human approach the arena. He was shorter than most of the Valan warriors, and his frame was not as large or imposing as Velaray's. He looked out of place among the towering, muscular aliens. Velaray's eyes narrowed as she observed the human. "So the humans send their weakest," she muttered under her breath, though her voice was loud enough for the crowd to hear. She was not impressed. Humans were known for their fragility and limited strength, and she had no reason to believe this one would be any different. The human approached the center of the arena, his footsteps steady. He stopped just a few meters from Velaray, and for a brief moment he met her gaze. His eyes were calm, even as he faced the fiercest warrior in the galaxy. He didn't flinch or hesitate. There was something about him that caught her attention, something that made her wonder if this human might be more than just a fool. "I accept your challenge," the human said, his voice firm and clear. Velaray's lips curled into a smirk. She was about to crush him, but she wanted to hear him speak first. "You have 1 minute," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You will not survive a second against me." The crowd held its breath, and the tension in the arena grew thicker. The clock above the arena flickered to life, counting down from 1 minute. Velaray flexed her powerful arms, ready to take down the human in an instant. She was confident. There was no way he could stand a chance against her superior strength and skill. The human took a step forward, slowly and deliberately. His posture was relaxed, but there was something in the way he moved, like a predator preparing to strike. Velaray raised an eyebrow, curious about the human's confidence. "Do you truly believe you can last?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. The human didn't answer. Instead, he moved with surprising speed, ducking under her first attack. Velaray's fist flew past his head, and before she could recover, he rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding her second strike. The crowd gasped. This human wasn't as weak as they had all expected. Velaray's smirk faded, replaced by a look of curiosity. She hadn't expected him to be able to move so quickly. Most humans were clumsy in battle, relying on weapons or technology rather than their own strength. But this human, this one was different. He was agile, dodging her blows with ease, and his movements were precise. The princess growled in frustration. She was a warrior. She was built for combat. Yet this human was making her work for it. The seconds ticked by, and though she had the advantage in strength, his speed was starting to wear her down. She wasn't used to this. She had never been pushed this hard before. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, watching as the battle unfolded before them. Velare's pride was beginning to crack. She had thought this would be an easy victory, a show of her power. But now she was realizing that this human might not be as weak as she had believed. The human dodged again, and this time he struck. With a quick and calculated move, he landed a hit on her side, a blow that surprised even Velare. It wasn't powerful enough to hurt her severely, but it was enough to make her pause. She looked down at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Impressive," she muttered, her voice cold but tinged with a hint of respect. "But you are still outmatched." The clock continued ticking down, and the fight raged on. It was clear that the human wasn't going to give up. He wasn't here for glory. He was here to prove something. And Velare, for the first time in her life, was starting to wonder if she might have met her match. Velare's eyes narrowed as she watched the human dodge yet another of her powerful strikes. His movements were quick and precise, his body low to the ground as he used the terrain to his advantage. For a moment, she paused, watching him, carefully. How was it that someone so small and fragile could move like that? She had faced thousands of warriors, aliens, beasts, and machines, but none had ever made her work this hard. "You're faster than I expected," she said, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. She straightened up and flexed her fingers, ready to strike again. "But that won't save you." The human, whose name was Lieutenant Xander, didn't respond. He just continued to circle her, his eyes locked onto her every movement. His mind was focused, analyzing each step she took. He knew that her strength was immense, but he also knew that her arrogance was her weakness. He had to tire her out, make her believe that the human she faced was just like the others. Only then could he make his move. Xander had trained for moments like this. His mind was sharp and his instincts were honed from years of combat. He had fought in wars, survived in hostile environments, and faced enemies far more terrifying than anything he had seen on Athenar. But none of that had prepared him for the might of a Valan warrior princess. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Velare lunged forward again, her fist aimed straight at Xander's head. But once again he was too quick for her. He ducked, sliding under her strike and then rolling away to the side. The princess growled in frustration as her attack missed, her eyes flashing with anger. "Why do you keep running?" she demanded. "Why not face me head on? You cannot win this way." Xander paused for a split second, giving her a look that was almost calm. He wasn't afraid, but he knew that to face her head on would be his downfall. He had to play it smart. "I'm not running," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm just giving you the chance to tire yourself out." Velare scoffed, her pride stung by his words. "Tire me out?" she echoed with a laugh. "I am a Valan princess. I have fought in battles that would break the spirit of lesser beings. Your human body will give up before mine does." The princess was growing more impatient with each passing second. She had expected this fight to be over by now. The clock above the arena was ticking down and she had only a few moments left to end this. But the human was still there, still moving, still dodging. She clenched her fists, ready to bring this charade to an end. "You are pathetic," she spat, charging at him once more. This time she was ready to end it with a single blow. But Xander's focus didn't waver. He darted to the left, narrowly avoiding the punch that would have crushed him. As he moved, he spotted an opening, just a small gap between the princess's defenses. With incredible speed, he darted forward and landed a quick, solid hit to her ribs. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it caught her off guard. The impact made her stumble back, her breath catching in her throat for a moment. She had expected the human to cower, but instead he had managed to land a hit. She gritted her teeth and stood tall, glaring at him. "You dare strike me?" she growled, her voice full of fury. "That was a mistake." Xander didn't flinch. "You're not invincible, Velaray," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Everyone has their limits, even you." The princess's pride flared up once again. She had been called many things in her life: powerful, unstoppable, perfect. She had always believed it, and now, in the heat of battle, she couldn't stand the thought of being challenged by someone so beneath her. But as much as she wanted to dismiss Xander as just another foolish human, there was something about him that made her hesitate. He wasn't just fast. He wasn't just clever. There was something deeper, something in his eyes that showed a quiet strength. It was the kind of strength that couldn't be measured by size or power alone. It was the kind of strength that came from survival, from the will to never give up. Velaray took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to end this soon, or the human might actually prove her wrong. She couldn't allow that. With a roar, she charged at him again, this time with even greater speed. She was determined to finish him off, to make an example of this foolish human. But Xander had prepared for this. As she lunged at him, he saw the attack coming. His body moved before his mind even had a chance to fully process what was happening. He ducked and slid to the side, narrowly avoiding her attack once again. Velaray's momentum carried her forward, and she stumbled, momentarily losing her balance. That was all the opening Xander needed. With a swift and calculated movement, he grabbed a piece of the arena's debris, a large, jagged rock, and hurled it towards her. It wasn't meant to hurt her. It was meant to distract her. The rock hit her in the side, knocking her slightly off balance. She turned her head just in time to see Xander darting forward, ready to land another blow. This time, however, Velaray didn't flinch. Instead, she regained her footing and quickly stepped back, her expression darkening. "You are persistent, human," she said, her voice low. "I'll give you that. But it won't matter. This fight ends now." Xander didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew the clock was running out, and if he could just hold on for a few more seconds, he might actually succeed. But the princess wasn't going to give up easily. The battle was far from over. As the clock above the arena continued to tick down, both warriors knew that the real fight was only just beginning. The battle raged on, with Velaray and Xander locked in a contest of speed, skill, and willpower. As the seconds ticked by, the princess grew more and more frustrated. Her every move was being countered by the human, and her usual arrogance was beginning to crack. She had always been the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled. But this human was showing her something she had never seen before: persistence. Xander's moves were precise, almost calculated. He wasn't a perfect fighter, but he was resourceful. He knew he couldn't match Velaray's strength, so he relied on his agility, his wits, and his understanding of his own limitations. He kept his distance, always staying one step ahead, just barely avoiding her strikes. He wasn't trying to defeat her, not yet. He was trying to survive. As the fight continued, the tension in the arena was palpable. The audience had never seen anything like it. They had expected the human to fall within seconds, yet here he was, still standing, still fighting. The Vaylans, proud of their royal princess, watched in stunned silence. They had never thought a human would challenge the princess, let alone survive for this long. Velaray, however, was no longer focused on the crowd. Her eyes were locked on Xander, her brow furrowed in concentration. This human was not like the others. He wasn't afraid, nor was he retreating. He wasn't even trying to prove himself. Instead, he was simply trying to last. The princess's confidence began to waver as she saw how well Xander had adapted to her every move. She had expected him to collapse in fear, but instead, he was managing to dodge and counter with a calmness that unsettled her. For the first time, she wondered if she had underestimated him. As the fight reached the halfway point, Velaray decided to change tactics. She wasn't just going to overpower him anymore, she needed to outsmart him. She slowed her movements, letting him think that she was growing tired. She wanted him to think he had an opening, that he could take advantage of her apparent weakness. Xander noticed the shift in her behavior. He could sense that Velaray was toying with him. He knew she had the advantage in pure power, but he also knew that if he could just keep her engaged for a little longer, he might find a way to turn the tables. He ducked under another wild swing from the princess and rolled to the side. His muscles were aching and his breathing was heavy, but he refused to give up. He had trained for situations like this, for moments when the odds seemed impossible. His training, his experience, and his determination were all that kept him moving. But what Velaray didn't know was that Xander wasn't just a regular soldier. He had spent years in the harshest environments, facing enemies who were far stronger than the average warrior. He had learned to fight with his mind as much as with his body. He knew that it wasn't about overpowering an opponent. It was about understanding them, predicting their next move, and exploiting their weaknesses. Xander's mind raced as he continued to move, watching Velaray's every step. He could see the small signs of fatigue in her eyes, the way her movements had started to slow just slightly. She was still powerful, still fast, but she wasn't as invincible as she had believed. With every strike she missed, Velaray's frustration grew. Her pride had never been challenged like this before. She had been the untouchable warrior princess, the one who never lost, who never hesitated. But now, here she was, facing a human soldier who was making her question everything she had ever known. As the battle continued, flashes of Xander's past began to surface in his mind. He remembered the countless training sessions, the brutal exercises that pushed his body and mind to their limits. He remembered the wars he had fought in, the battles where victory was never guaranteed. He had fought against aliens with far greater strength, monsters that could tear a person apart with a single swipe. But he had survived, not by being the strongest, but by being the most prepared. Xander's past was filled with moments of uncertainty, moments when victory seemed impossible, but each time he had pushed through. It wasn't just his training that made him strong, it was his experience. He had learned to anticipate the unexpected, to remain calm when others would panic, to use every opportunity to his advantage. In that moment, as he dodged another swing from the princess, he realized something. This battle wasn't about defeating Velaray. It was about showing her that strength wasn't just about physical power. Strength came from within, from the will to continue when all hope seemed lost. Xander's eyes flicked to the clock above the arena. There were only seconds left. The princess had underestimated him from the start, but now it was his turn to prove that humans could be just as strong as any Velan. He wasn't here to fight for glory or honor. He was here to show that humans were more than just fragile creatures. They were survivors. As the final seconds of the challenge ticked away, Velaray made one last desperate attempt to finish the fight. She gathered all her strength and charged at him with a speed that could have crushed a mountain. Her fists flew like hammers, each one aimed at taking Xander down once and for all. But Xander was ready. He didn't try to block her attacks or match her strength. Instead, he used her momentum against her. With a swift movement, he ducked under her punch and used his shoulder to shove her off balance. Velaray stumbled forward, her foot slipping on the uneven ground. For the first time in the fight, she faltered. Xander didn't waste the opportunity. He moved in quickly, his fist landing lightly against her side. It wasn't enough to hurt her, but it was enough to remind her of the human's persistence, his unwillingness to give up. As the clock reached its final second, Xander stepped back, breathing heavily but standing tall. He had made it. He had survived the full minute. Velaray stood frozen, her body tense, her pride bruised. She stared at the human, a mixture of disbelief and respect in her eyes. "You lasted the full minute," she muttered under her breath. "How?" Xander simply looked at her, his expression calm. "It wasn't about winning," he said quietly. "It was about showing you that even a human can be more than what you expect." Velaray didn't speak again, but something had changed in her. The human had forced her to reconsider everything she had believed. And though she still held the power, she knew that this fight was far from over. The crowd in the arena was silent, the tension thick in the air. The clock above the arena had finally counted down to 0, signaling the end of the battle. For the first time in a long while, Velaray felt a strange mixture of frustration and admiration. The human Lieutenant Xander had not only survived her challenge but had done so with a quiet determination that unsettled her. She had expected him to crumble under pressure, but instead he had made it through with skill, agility, and a calmness she hadn't anticipated. Xander stood across from her, breathing heavily, but still on his feet. His clothes were torn from the battle, his skin bruised and scratched, but his eyes were sharp, his focus unwavering. Velaray had no doubt that he was tired. Every part of his body had been pushed to its limit. But there was something about him, something in his gaze that made her realize this human was not like the others. She had faced countless warriors in her life, but none had fought with such resilience. None had made her question herself. Even, for a second, she had expected to show the universe her power, to demonstrate that no one could challenge her, but this human had done the impossible. He had survived. Velaray took a step toward him, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. She still believed she was the stronger one, but this human had proven that strength wasn't just about size or raw power. It was about endurance, about willpower, about the ability to push past pain and fatigue. And Xander had shown all of that in the last minute. "You're a remarkable fighter," Velaray said, her voice betraying a note of respect. "I never expected a human to last this long." Xander nodded, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I wasn't here to fight for glory," he said, his voice calm. "I was here to show that humans are capable of more than just being seen as weak." Velaray didn't respond at first. She was still processing the reality of the fight. She had spent so much time training, perfecting her skills, believing that no one could stand against her, yet this human had managed to do what no one else had. He had forced her to take him seriously, and now she was left with the uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she had met someone who was not intimidated by her, someone who had seen through her pride and arrogance. The realization hit her harder than any blow had in the fight. She had always thought of herself as the most powerful being in the galaxy, but this human had shown her a different kind of strength. Velaray clenched her fists, her pride still burning strong. She had to finish this. She couldn't let the human think he had won, not even if he had made it through the full minute. But as she stared at Xander, she found that her mind wasn't as focused as it usually was. The human had forced her to think about things she hadn't considered before, things that made her question her own beliefs. Xander noticed her hesitation. For a moment, the princess had lowered her guard, and in that brief instant, he saw something he hadn't expected. Doubt. Velaray was still a formidable opponent, but she wasn't as invincible as she had once thought. And that made Xander realize something important. This fight wasn't just about physical strength. It was about understanding, about finding the weakness in an opponent's arrogance and using that to your advantage. "You're not as unbeatable as you think," Xander said quietly, his voice steady. He was still catching his breath, but his mind was clear. "I've faced stronger opponents than you. But the thing about strength is that it's not always enough. Sometimes it's the will to keep going, even when the odds are stacked against you. That matters most." Velaray's eyes flashed with anger at his words, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. She had underestimated this human, thinking that brute strength and power would be enough to win. But she had been wrong. Xander had endured, and in doing so, he had shown her that there was more to fighting than just force. The princess took a deep breath, steadying herself. The anger she had felt began to fade, replaced by something else. Respect, perhaps. She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. This human had earned her attention, and that was something she didn't give easily. "You've proven yourself. Human," she said, her voice softer now. "You've lasted. And that's more than I can say for most of the warriors I've faced." Xander gave her a small, knowing smile. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it for humanity. To show that we're not just some weak species to be pushed around. We can hold our own." Velaray tilted her head, studying him. "And you think that one battle proves your worth?" Xander didn't hesitate. "I think it shows that we're not just what others think we are." We've got more to offer than they realize. Velaray stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. She had always seen humans as fragile, weak creatures who were easily overpowered. But now, after this challenge, she realized that there was more to them than she had ever imagined. They were not just survivors. They were fighters. And perhaps, in their own way, they were just as powerful as any Velan warrior. For the first time, Velaray felt a shift in her thoughts. Maybe it wasn't strength alone that made someone powerful. Maybe it was the ability to adapt, to learn from each battle, to never give up. Maybe there was more to being a warrior than just physical might. The arena was quiet, and the tension that had filled the air earlier began to dissipate. The fight was over, and the crowd was still processing the unexpected turn of events. They had all expected Velaray to crush the human, to show the galaxy that the Velan were unbeatable. But instead they had witnessed something else, a battle of minds, of wills, of endurance. Velaray stepped back, her pride still intact, but her mind opened to new possibilities. She hadn't won this fight, but she had learned something valuable. Perhaps there was more to strength than she had ever realized. Xander watched her carefully, his expression calm. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady. The princess didn't respond immediately. She only nodded once, as if acknowledging that the battle had ended not with a victory but with something much more significant: respect. The seconds on the clock had run out, but the tension in the arena was far from over. The fight between Velaray and Lieutenant Xander had not ended with a decisive victory. Instead, it had left both of them standing in the middle of the arena, breathing heavily, each questioning the other in ways they hadn't expected. Velaray, the mighty warrior princess, had never faced an opponent like this human before. And Xander, despite his exhaustion, had proved something to himself and the entire galaxy. Humans weren't as weak as many thought. Velaray's fists were clenched, her chest rising and falling as she tried to steady her breath. Her eyes, which had once been filled with confidence and arrogance, now held a flicker of doubt. She had expected to defeat the human in moments, to prove that no one, especially not a fragile human, could stand up to her strength. But now, after everything that had happened, she found herself unable to dismiss him so easily. Xander, for his part, stood tall, his body aching but his mind sharp. His clothes were torn and his skin bruised, but his eyes were steady. He hadn't won the battle, but he hadn't lost either. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't about beating the princess. It was about earning her respect. He had done just that. Velaray eyed him carefully, as if trying to figure out what it was that made him so different. She had faced countless warriors, but none had made her feel the way this human did. He hadn't fought with brute force, nor had he shown any signs of fear. Instead, he had relied on strategy, agility, and an unbreakable will. And now, despite her own strength, she was faced with the undeniable truth. The human had outlasted her. "You've earned something today," Velaray said, her voice less certain than before. "I never thought I would say this, but you are not like the others." Xander, still catching his breath, nodded. "I'm not here to prove anything to you, princess. I'm here to prove that humans are stronger than the galaxy thinks we are." The words hit Velaray harder than she expected. She had always believed that strength came from size, power, and dominance. But here was a human who had shown her that strength came in different forms, in the ability to adapt, to endure, and to keep going no matter the odds. For a long moment, Velaray said nothing. Her eyes moved from Xander to the crowd, who had been watching the entire battle in stunned silence. They had witnessed something extraordinary today. A human had fought against a Velan princess and had survived, something that no one had expected. And as the silence stretched on, the princess felt something shift within her. She wasn't just the princess of Athenar anymore. She wasn't just the strongest warrior in the galaxy. She was someone who had just learned a valuable lesson. She turned her gaze back to Xander. "Your kind, humans, are more than I thought," she said quietly. "You are not just survivors. You are warriors in your own right." Xander didn't smile or gloat. He didn't need to. He had accomplished what he had set out to do. He had shown Valeray that humans were not to be underestimated. They were not a species to be ignored or belittled. And though the princess was still stronger, he knew that in the end, it was his persistence that had made the difference. I never expected a human to change my view of the world, Valeray continued, her voice calm but serious. But you have. Xander's expression softened and he nodded. I just want us all to see that we can fight together. That's the real strength, the strength to stand beside each other, no matter our differences. Valeray's eyes flickered, and for a moment she appeared to consider his words. The idea of unity, of fighting together, was something that had never crossed her mind. For so long, the Velan had viewed themselves as superior, as the galaxy's protectors. The thought of working with other species, even humans, had seemed ridiculous, but now, after everything she had seen in this battle, she wasn't so sure. You think we can all stand together? She asked, her voice quieter now, as if testing the idea. Xander met her gaze without hesitation. I know we can. If we learn to respect each other, to fight together, we can achieve more than any one species could on its own. Strength doesn't just come from power, it comes from unity. For the first time, Valeray didn't respond with defiance. Instead, she looked at Xander with a new understanding. There was a quiet wisdom in his words, something that resonated with her. It wasn't just about dominance. It was about partnership, about seeing the strength in others and working together to achieve something greater. The princess took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The battle had ended, but something far more important had begun. It wasn't just about proving who was stronger anymore. It was about what could be achieved when two very different beings found common ground. Maybe you're right, she said softly, more to herself than to Xander. Maybe we can all stand together. Maybe it's time to stop seeing strength only as power. Xander nodded, his gaze unwavering. It's about time. A long silence passed between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of mutual understanding. The kind of respect that only comes from facing something difficult and coming through it stronger. Both of them had learned something new that day. Valeray had learned that humans could stand their ground, and Xander had learned that strength came in many forms, not just the physical kind. As the crowd began to cheer, Valeray stepped back, giving Xander a nod of acknowledgement. You've earned my respect, human, she said, her voice carrying over the arena, and you've earned a place among us. The words were simple, but they held weight. To hear the Princess of Athenar, the most powerful warrior in the galaxy, admit that she had been wrong, that she had learned from a human, was a victory in itself. Xander smiled, though his body ached from the battle. Thank you, Princess. But it's not just about me. It's about all of us. Together. And with that, the fight was over. Not just the physical battle, but the battle of pride, of belief, of what it meant to be strong. The princess and the human had both gained something from each other, something more valuable than any victory.